I like to sit in the chaos of conflict and just being uncomfortable with it and taking a long time sitting in that uncomfortability of being in conflict till I actually figure out like which direction I want to move in. Once I figure it out, I have so much conviction that nothing could sway me.
What's the most important trait for you when you talk to a founder or a member?
If a founder is able to go deep on a subject matter that they're really passionate about, they're really not afraid of learning. You should have the confidence that you're going to grok something down the road, even if new things are launching. The second one is they're not afraid of putting in the effort or the hard work. And then the last one, they're really passionate. I think micromanaging has a negative connotation. I think of it as being in the trenches with the people that I'm working with. I like the details.
It is so hard to be a founder. On a good day, you will kind of like wake up feeling great. By lunchtime, you're like, this shit is not going to work. By evening, you'll be like, yes, I closed a hire. And that roller coaster is so intense and it doesn't get any less intense. So I think that the only way you can deal with it is if you are just kind of resilient.
Well, hello, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Ruchi, and you are?
Aditya.
Awesome. I like to call myself the founding member of SPC. I kind of started SPC because I wanted to start a company, and I wanted to surround myself by smart people who were like challenging me and like pushing me to find the right idea. I also wanted to make sure I didn't make the mistake of folding before I even got started. And usually good things take a really long time. So I wanted to surround myself with people who are in a similar situation and just, wanted to be heads down, building, prototyping, failing, and eventually we would hit upon the right thing. And all that journey, which we call the squiggle here at SPC, is one that I didn't want to do alone. I didn't want to be sitting in my home on my couch, being depressed every day, not being able to figure shit out, thinking about billion-dollar ideas because they don't exist. But I wanted to surround myself with people who are iterating, in the same ways that I was. So in that journey, Aditya at some point left his job as CTO at Dropbox. And I was trying really, really hard to convince him to join SPC. And for some reason, he just didn't want to join. So after about a few months, like 6 months, he decided he would be an intern at SPC. Because, that was like not a full commitment, but willingness to participate. So I'm kind of curious why you were so resistant in the early days.
Hey everyone, I'm Aditya. I'm one of the partners here at South Park Commons. I've had a meteoric rise clearly from being an intern to a partner. Welcome all of you. It's a pleasure to meet all of you here. And kind of the format we're going to follow is Ruchi and I will interview each other for about 40 minutes, but we should have some questions after, some time after for questions from the audience. But to get into it, I think it was probably just because I didn't want to have the same boss at home and at work. I think, but if I had to take a step back, I think probably the main reason was Dropbox is just really stressful. It's a stressful experience. I think that one of the things we famously say at South Park nowadays is that in order to join South Park, you have to be unemployed. You can't which is actually not obvious why that should be the case. You should be able to explore and ideate and think about things kind of like part-time, perhaps nights and weekends, right? It's actually not an unreasonable point of view to do that. But what we have found is that if you're the kind of individual who's deeply driven and, likes kind of like winning and kind of doing a good job at things, then it is unlikely that you actually have the time and the space to think about great things while you're consumed with the company, right? And chances are, even after you leave what is perhaps like an intense journey, you will need some time to defrag. You'll need some time to collect your thoughts and to get yourself to the point where you can start feeling creative and generative again. So I think my answer is that Dropbox is just stressful, right? Like I'm very proud of like what we built and the outcome that we had. But man, like any time you're kind of in the final 12 months before an IPO, a lot of the technical and organizational decisions you have made in a company before that come to start kind of like, oh, compliance over everything. I think so. It was just kind of a tough time. So I think I just needed some time to defrag, and I just did not want to actively, I think, in some ways, almost commit to something. Is the answer.
Was it that, or did you actually think you didn't need help because you were such a rock star?
I mean, I kind of still feel that way. So that hasn't changed. One of the things that's quite unique about Ruchi, and I think our team members here will also attest to this, is that you're very comfortable creating situations, I would say, of constructive conflict. You're not kind of afraid to, in some ways, make it a little uncomfortable in order to try to get to perhaps the right answer or the truth. And it's, it can be awkward sometimes, because I think all of us, and particularly, well, maybe New York less than San Francisco, but I think in San Francisco, part of the issue is everybody's a nice person. We don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, right? Like, you don't want to kind of say the thing that's on your mind. It's kind of like the classic, the New Yorker will say to your face, and San Francisco, in California will say behind your back, right? But it's a classic, we are kind of afraid to say the thing that might be on our mind because we're kind of afraid of creating that conflict. Why are you not afraid of that? Like, where does that come from?
I have to think about these because they're deep. I need to look inwards to find the right answers. I don't like to wallow in like niceties and small talk. And I feel that confrontation very quickly leads to resolution, which is why, honestly, I'm confrontational. And I like to sit in the chaos of conflict and just being uncomfortable with it. And taking a long time sitting in that uncomfortability of being in conflict till I actually figure out which direction I want to move in. But the nice thing about that is that once I figure it out, I have so much conviction that nothing could sway me. So, I mean, those are some of the reasons why I like confrontation and I like conflict. It doesn't always work on my favor. Almost all of you here know Finn. And I love to tell this story. But Finn, back in the day, right after graduation...
Is Finn here for this story? No, he's not.
This is great. So I can go all out. He's not. Finn is a really nice guy. Have you guys met Finn? Yeah? Okay, great. Awesome. So he used to be my chief of staff. And I used to have these meetings with people. And I noticed a pattern. After every meeting, he would run out of the conference room. And then one day I was like, what the hell is going on? So I followed him out of the conference room and he would be talking to the person that I was meeting with, often founders, right outside of SPC. And he was apologizing on my behalf. He was like, I'm really sorry. She's not always like this, but usually people get a lot from a constructive criticism. She really cares about you. And then I'm like, Finn, why are you doing this? I meant every single word that I said in that meeting. He was like, no, I think it's really important that people leave thinking you're a good person at heart. And he did this for months at end till I put a stop to it. But I found it pretty hilarious. That he would just run out of every single meeting and then have this conversation with the person outside SPC's doors. Okay, I'll take it a slightly different direction. So, before I decided to do this Q&A, I was thinking about what are the few things, if any, that I've learned from Aditya? And I thought really hard about this. He used to be a TA at CMU and he used to teach the subject to 11. So maybe I learned some initial computer science concepts from him, The
Fundamentals of Data Structures and Algorithms was the name of the course.
There we go.
15 to 11, if you've ever taken it.
But then I was thinking a little harder about this. And I realized that one of the most interesting, I wouldn't say fundamental, but interesting lessons I learned from Aditya for many reasons, but I'll let him speak to it, was how to think about money. And he has a very unique way of thinking about money. So why don't you tell us, how do you actually think about money?
It's unique. perhaps a little unconventional. I'm not also advocating that it's the right way to follow, but I come from pretty humble origins. Like I didn't grow up particularly well off. Comfortable. I worked my way through college. So I kind of worked at least 20 hours a week all through like college. Being my first job, was as a what are they called? Like the dorm, like
security guard.
Yeah, exactly. Like you sit at the front of the dorm and you kind of check people's IDs when they're coming in. So I used to work the 5 a.m. to 8 a.m. shift because that paid the most. So I would do that and then go to class. And anyways, it kind of made me a bunch of money, but I had to work all through college. But despite that, I kind of graduated college with, a lot, $50,000 like credit card debt because, I didn't have a student loan, which is kind of a lot of debt. And I was rotating it amongst like 4 credit cards. But I remember I graduated and my first job was at Oracle. And I got to Oracle my first day. I'm in California and I should buy a car because, you need a car to get around in California. So in my head, I was just like, what car should I buy? And my dream was always to buy the ultimate driving machine, which is a BMW. So I'm like, I could go and buy like a very reasonable Toyota or, whatever, Honda, or I could buy a BMW. And then I was there thinking, I should buy a BMW. And kind of my rationale was that today is the day in my life. Literally today is the day in my life that I have the lowest earning potential for all time. I will only make more money from here, right? And if I am not optimistic about my own chances, then who the fuck else is going to be optimistic on my behalf, right? So if I am incredibly optimistic about my own chances, then the delta of buying a Civic or a 323 Ci, which is what I got, BMW, it's an easy decision. I should obviously kind of like get the BMW. So I got the BMW on my first day of, my first job at Oracle. My father was not very happy about this decision because he did not understand it. And I remember, I think this has kind of played out multiple times in my career. So the same thing when I was switching from my job from Oracle to Facebook, my dad, I was just like, Dad, they're kind of paying the same salary. I didn't really know much about stock options, but Facebook is giving me, I was so dumb. Dad, they give me 8,000 options. And I didn't even know the idea of fully diluted ownership because it was just in 2004, nobody was as smart about startups as there was no chat GPT to ask. So I just got 8,000 options, which was fine. But, and then I think my whole philosophy on money is that I think you should be irrationally exuberant about your future chances. I think if you are not, then who else is going to be on your behalf? I say this as someone who doesn't come with a silver spoon, right? Because I think generally you assume that this is a mentality that someone with, kind of a default fail-safe can have. I don't have that, right? But I think it is completely logically consistent that if you are going to make a bet on yourself, then you should actually allow yourself to kind of be fully self-realized on this axis. I realized over time that it is a pretty risky strategy. So this is why I offer it as a story, not as a recommendation. But I have many frameworks about money. I think, but this is kind of probably the most salient one. It's kind of insane though. Yeah.
But we have applied it in our lives time and time and again. I remember at Facebook, whenever someone needed to sell their options, because again, we were just so naive about stock options. We didn't file 83B elections. When you left, you kind of had to sell to exercise, etc. I would pour all my savings and it would be $7,000, but I would buy on the secondary market those $7,000 of Facebook shares. I remember at Dropbox, when they acquired Cove, it was the same discussion, equity versus cash, definitely double down on equity, kept every single stock, we got from Dropbox. And then the same story again at SPC, we definitely invested our own money in SPC. When we started the funds, we doubled down on our own money. And I think the reason is the same reason. Fundamentally, you have to have the confidence to bet on yourself. And money is just like one of those means. But when you put everything on the line, you don't have an option to fail.
Yeah, I think conviction is a self-referential loop. I actually think it's very hard to be. I'm like 80% convicted in the set of things that I do, but the 20% I'm going to hedge my bets. I actually think that most of the people that I have met who, and this is hard to kind of say it's causated, but it certainly seems heavily correlated. They tend to kind of like be all in kind of on the conviction aspect of it along multiple dimensions of their life, whether it be what they work on, how they choose to spend their time, how they choose to allocate resources, whether that be capital or other things. And I think it kind of creates like, the other thing I tell them is like failure is not an option, right? Like there is no kind of like second like thing here. So, I just have to work hard and smart enough to kind of like make this work. Okay, Ruchi, I'll kind of move on to the next question with you. I bet a bunch of folks in this audience are either kind of founders today or perhaps want to be founders in the future. And one of the intrinsic, in some ways, tensions I think that exist when you're a founder is like, how detail oriented should you be, right? Like, should you be trying to get into all of the details, micromanage stuff, or should you kind of be staying high level and essentially kind of giving direction, but kind of, doing trust but verify? And in this, we have pretty different philosophies. Like, you are a micromanager. I do not like micromanaging. In fact, that is my least favorite thing to do. I prefer to kind of like give high level, I would say, guidance and then kind of get out of the way. So I'm curious, how have you thought about finding that balance? And like, why have you converged on the area that you have?
First off, I think micromanaging has a negative connotation. And I think the dichotomy that you're presenting is a false one. We openly discuss this both in a professional and personal relationship. I am most suited towards starting something, starting something from scratch, starting something from nothing. And in that phase, you don't really have a team to delegate to. You're doing everything, including taking out the trash. So when you operate in that mindset, you are doing everything and you need to know how to do everything. It's not an option to say like, oh, I'm going to delegate this, but who are you going to delegate this to? And there are very few rare folks who can do everything, which is like start and like be really focused on details and micromanage, and at the same time scale organizations and be really great at scaling and delegating. And I would say, Aditya, like you're actually better at the latter. Like you're really great at motivating people, building organizations, scaling them, delegating them, and scaling up SPC. So I do think that it is a false dichotomy. And I don't think of it as micromanagement. I think of it as being in the trenches with the people that I'm working with. I like the details. I like perfection. I'm a little bit OCD about it. And I think the thing that doesn't work when you're in that mode is that you can't scale. You cannot do like multiple things at the same time. You're usually focused on one problem and you're focused on getting that right. So I think there are different modes of operation during different phases of company building. And then I think that when you do have a team, you have to learn to scale so that you can make everyone around you productive and get that 10x efficiency and that 10x scale.
I think it's really important. I mean, I don't actually think we're that misaligned on this aspect. I think there's one key part that as a founder, as a manager, I think it's really important that you actually be able to get all the way into the details, right? I'll kind of share a story that to this day is kind of pretty inspiring. When I was at Dropbox, obviously Dropbox kind of had a kind of a native desktop app for the Mac, which kind of like did a bunch of Finder integration stuff. As you can imagine, as new versions of the Mac OS came out, some of them were often kind of like causing our Finder integration to break. So we would occasionally have to go in and kind of like speak to senior leadership at Apple who are kind of like either like, listen, like, what are you doing? Because all of your crazy hacks from the previous one won't work. And we went in once, Drew and I went in once to Cupertino and Craig Federighi, kind of like, who's kind of obviously running all the software at Apple. He kind of came to kind of talk to us. And we were kind of describing in fairly arcane detail, like, Craig, like one of the OS interrupts kind of that we relied on, that we were kind of signal intercepting, is no longer kind of letting us do that. And we think that you guys are kind of like blocking us. And Craig was like, no, I don't actually think that's what's going on. And he's like, let me go look at the actual change that might have caused this, and I'll go dig into it and get back to you. And then Drew and I were like, nah, there's no way he's actually going to understand the code or like, look at it. But then that weekend, Craig sent us kind of a detailed kind of like explanation for what was going on. It was clear that he had gone and found the change, understood it, actually back tested it. And I remember kind of being like, wow, like it's incredible that he actually had the ability to kind of, I don't know how many people work at Apple under his part of the world, but like probably 20,000, that he was able to zoom in, find it. And I think it's just a great example of being able to lead at like different altitudes. But I do think a lost art, like I think it is good to be able to zoom in and to create an organization where the leaders are actually expected to kind of zoom in and understand the details. I think for a long time, the prevalent view was that a manager should just empower and not actually kind of like get out of the, like basically like give direction, get out of the way, empower. But I think it's critical that like a manager also be able to get into the details, and they shouldn't feel apologetic, because ultimately the manager's job is not to make the employees happy, right? The manager's job is to deliver excellent fucking like products, right? Like that make the company win. And as part of that, like you have to get into the details. So I do think that's something I've learned from you. One of the few things, as you kind of correctly pointed out earlier. Yeah.
But then turning the question back to you, like, what makes people good at scaling? Like, what are some of the traits that hyperscalers usually have?
What makes people good at scaling? So I'll point out one that I often used to think about at Facebook, and Mark would often talk about this, that I think is interesting. One of the things that is probably the most almost emotionally dissonant when you're scaling a company, right, is that by definition, if you're in hypergrowth, let's assume the company grows from, 100 people to 1,000 people in the course of like 2 years. Happens, right? It's happening for a bunch of good companies right now. Then by definition, most people who have leadership roles when the company is 100, right? Like they're overseeing some portion of what the company does. Chances are that there are not that many people who are managing 10% of the company's kind of output anymore, right? So most people actually see a reduction in their relative kind of ownership within a company. And that is emotionally very hard, because you feel like a smaller deal at the company, right? And most people are not actually able to see the bigger picture, that like, no. Presumably the company grew from 100 to 1,000 because you're tackling a bunch of like bigger things. So in total output of like what the company does, you're actually responsible for more, because you're emotionally, your feeling is that, oh, I'm no longer that big a deal at the company. Not that many people know me, right? Like I'm kind of running a smaller part. I used to run all of data science. Now I run data science only for our core business or maybe our emerging product or something like that, right? And I think that is actually a very toxic point of view, even though it's very understandable from kind of a human emotions, because ultimately we end up feeling like what the particular, I would say the sentiment is within the organization. I think the people who are really good at scaling, I think are actually able to understand their role in the context of where the company is kind of going, right? It's just hard though. I think it's hard, but I do think that's one aspect. The other way I would phrase it is that the people who scale well are the people who don't have a problem of letting go of prior structures, right? Like it's kind of the more perhaps succinct way. And they're very cognizant that organizational structures at hypergrowth companies are very fluid and temporary, right? Like the organizational structure that exists today, even on a team level or an org level, is just, it's probably already out of date, right? Like there's an incredible amount of organizational bit rot, if you will, and you kind of are deeply almost embracing that. The second thing I'd say is that, and we might disagree on this, I think people who are good at scaling, particularly in hyperscaling, I'd say, are very comfortable with, like, I would say, shit not being perfect. Like, actually, they're kind of like, if you're growing that fast, a bunch of stuff is not going to be happening exactly. Like, they're able to let go of the small details that don't matter. They don't get annoyed about it. They don't get triggered by it. And they're instead being like, Is the ship generally pointed in the right direction? Is stuff happening right 6 out of 10 times? And they're able to not, it's actually often it's almost like, are they able to have like do not get personally triggered by it, right? They're just like, listen, this stuff is fine. It's like, I just want to focus on the bigger thing. All of this other shit, it's all small, it's annoying, but I'm not going to get distracted. I'm not going to have a visceral reaction. I think that's hard to do for some people.
Yeah. I've been thinking all day about how I can organize these curtains to look better. I mean, it's just like literally all day I've been thinking about these curtains.
I have not thought about the curtains today. Yeah, that doesn't mean but I think it works. I think somebody maybe should, but like it's not me. But so I think those are the two things that come to. The third one that I would call out, I think, of hyperscaling is you really, and it's actually really important. You're actually able to continue to hire people who are better than you. Perhaps a little bit narrower in scope, right? Because as the company gets larger, you're finding people who might be a little bit more specialized in the early generalists. But ideally, you really embrace that the company will be better if you hire better people than you. And I think it's a kind of a common ego trap that you only really want to hire people that you feel smarter than. Like that you're kind of like, right? Like the best people at hyperscaling are like, they're actually pushing the bar forward and don't have a ton of, like, I think that one of the happiest days of my life at Facebook, and this is kind of weird, was that when there were, it was a long story, but for about a year, there were 3 of us who were all directors of engineering. We were kind of running engineering together. We didn't have a VP of engineering. So the 3 of us, me, Ishan, and Bobby, were running engineering because we just couldn't find like a good engineering like leader who everyone liked, and especially Mark. But the day we hired Shrep, who then kind of like Mike Schreffer, who ended up being my boss, also your boss for a bit, right? Maybe?
I had 12 managers. I cannot keep track of
them. So
like
Shrep, the day he was hired, I was like, man, this is awesome. Shrep he was kind of the VP of engineering at all of Mozilla before that. So he was kind of leading Firefox. He was great. And my first reaction was, this is great. This person will actually help me get better. He'll help the company win. He's going to like basically raise the bar for greatness at the company, and this will make all of us win. I think that like that has kind of constantly been my mental model, which is like, how do you surround myself with people who will help me win more? Because I love winning. What is the most important? I mean, there's obviously a lot of traits that we talk about when we are looking in founders: grit, resilience, domain excellence, North Star. What's the most important trait for you when you kind of like talk to a founder or a member? What are you looking for that gets you like really excited?
So this is very personal to me. I don't think everyone at SPC or on SPC staff would agree with me. But the thing that gets me super, super excited is if a founder is able to go deep on a subject matter that they're really passionate about. And when I say deep, I really mean deep, like not superficial about it, not hand wavy about it, not a weird top-down market analysis, but like, they've really like done the work to understand the subject matter and are asking like really fundamental questions in pursuit of the truth. I mean, Aditya often calls this Socratic truth, but that's what gets me really excited about founders. And I think there are multiple second-order effects as a result of this. One is that they're really not afraid of learning, and that's really important. Like you should be able to constantly learn. Nothing should paralyze you. You shouldn't be afraid of the unknown. You should have the confidence that you're going to grok something down the road, even if new things are launching. So not being afraid to learn is pretty fundamental for me. The second one is they're not afraid of putting in the effort or the hard work. And learning actually takes a lot of work. It doesn't come to you naturally. Like you really need to make the time, the space, make the effort to want to learn. And then the last one, and this is a pretty simple and basic one, is that they're really passionate. It's really difficult to go all in on something if you're not passionate. So that's why that particular trait really speaks to me. And those are the kinds of founders that I typically get along with really well.
I think depth is actually pretty important. kind of like deeply technical founders. But I also like people who I think I've always been drawn to people who I think who are immediately charismatic.
Yeah, you love loud, gregarious,
I love the
charismatic,
Riz. I love the Riz.
optimistic.
Yeah,
He
exactly.
loves the Riz.
I think that, I mean, the way I think that if you are starting a company, you need depth. You need some kind of like insight. You obviously need like some kind of insight, some brilliance. But in the early days, like, pre-revenue, pre-users, all you have is a prototype and a story. Like, you're just kind of a storyteller.
I'm going to challenge that. Which one of the 2 or 3 amazing founders that you have worked with, including Flipkart, had the Riz?
Dude, are you kidding? Sachin has so much Riz.
Now.
Yeah, but I saw the future. But I do think that I don't know. I think the way perhaps charisma. I think a lot of what we talk about at SPC is how important storytelling is in the early days. I think you have to be able to frame up your personal views on what you are building, why you're building it, the future you are building for, and then it's kind of like ultimately like your force field that you're then representing to different constituents all day long. You're storytelling. You're storytelling to potential people you want to hire, to people you're kind of like hoping to bring on and as investors, or to your users, right? So I think that I struggle to work with founders who I think are again, who kind of spike very hard on perhaps depth, but I kind of are struggling with the storytelling, because I think that's a key part of early stage, essentially, company creation. I think it's actually probably one of the it's a pretty, at least strong point of view from my end, that and we work with founders after they come into SPC to really figure out, like, to draw out the story. One of my favorite books recently about starting companies is actually by Rick Rubin. I don't know if you guys have read The Creative Act. Rick Rubin is a legendary music producer, right? Like, he has worked with some of the most amazing artists of our generation across a bunch of different genres. He's kind of a weirdo also, with like his big beard, but I think he's amazing. And when you read his book, he says that the act of a music producer is to be able to draw out the artist's story, their personal story, the story they're trying to tell through their art, in his case, often music, and then figure out a way to basically craft that story in a way that is the most authentic form of like that story that the artist can then tell the world. And he's like, when I can find the most authentic, real form that the artist believes that they can then literally broadcast, that's when magic happens, right? So for me, I think of my job as a VC is like, I'm trying to draw, like, what is the story that is coming from the founder that they are trying to channel through their product, their company. And when we can draw it out and get it to the point where it's compelling and authentic, then I think magic can happen, right? So that would be like the trait that I look for, kind of like who is capable of kind of telling those magical stories.
I mean, for those of you who know Aditya, he's an eternal optimist. So I often wonder, like, it's hard to be an eternal optimist all the time, but have there been moments when you wavered from your eternal optimism? And, like, can you speak to some of those moments? Like, when have you been scared and not optimistic? I won't say pessimist, but at least a realist.
So there's probably wow, there's probably multiple ways to answer it, but probably, like, I would say perhaps I've never had to deal, in some ways, yes, I am a crazy optimist. I'm a strong believer that my life tomorrow in the future will be better than my life is today. I have a great life, right? Like, I have amazing kids, an amazing partner, work that I deeply care about, people I get to do the work with. So my life is amazing, right? But I also believe that, like, 5 years from now, my life will be even better. I do have a strong belief in my arc, humanity's arc, and kind of the work that we do. But I'm also kind of lucky, right? I haven't had to go through moments of extreme, perhaps, hardship. My kids are healthy, my parents are healthy. So I do think that there are probably some things that God forbid, like I don't have to go through that, would probably make me have that, I think these moments that I think are quite hard, that you have to almost sometimes reveal your, where your optimism is questioned. But I do think that having probably like the one that perhaps is pertinent to this room is, I will say that there were times at Dropbox where it felt very hard. What I tell people is that at Facebook, my God, we were amazing. Our ability to build great things at Facebook was amazing because we had a really talented team. But looking back now that I know what startups are all about, I don't actually think Facebook had competition in kind of the conventional sense. Like Facebook's competition in some ways was only like as Facebook employees, how big can we dream? And how intensely do we push ourselves to achieve that dream? There's no externality that was kind of affecting us. In some ways, it felt as though the world was more under our control, right? And I say this in contrast to Dropbox, where honestly, like for every dollar of ARR, for every person that we had to hire, for every new user, it felt as though we were battling Microsoft, Google, and Apple at the high end, perhaps Box at the low end. And it always was just hard, right? And I remember there were moments where I was just like, man, I just don't know what to do. I don't know how to make this a little easier. Like, I don't know what to build, how to build it. Like, what is the right thing to do? And I think there were some low moments in those times. But, this is a little personal, but my mom's pretty religious. But, the first thing that you do when you're growing up is to reject the religion of your parents, I think. So I was like, I am not a Hindu. So I will not read the Bhagavad Gita. But about 5 or 6 years ago, I read the Gita for the first time. And I don't know how many of you have read it in the room, but it profoundly affected me because one of the big things it talks about was that you must do your best at what you do, but you must not care about the result, right? And it is a bizarre thing. It's like, you must put in all the work, do it as hard as you can, care about it to the utmost, but then leave the result kind of like to what it may be. But it has profoundly affected my worldview on startups and the job that I do, which is I think the world is very, very complex, right? I think that one of the mistakes you can make is that, and I think you have to somewhat believe this, that as a founder, you can control the exact outcome, right? But if you're being honest, like you are trying to do your best, but markets are big, economies are complicated, macro, micro, this shit is hard, right? So in some ways, I think as a founder, your mental model is that you must try your best, but also understand that you cannot control the exact outcome. And I think this is quite a hard duality to almost like internalize. I am still in the process of internalizing it. I don't claim to have reached complete, like every day I can work. Like, yeah, of course I want to win. Of course I want to make sure the world tilts in the direction that I want to tilt it. But every time I go too far in that direction, I'm reminded the hard way that I cannot actually control the full outcome, right? So I think that is the journey that I think has been important for me, which is how do you find that balance? I don't think it is something that you can learn simply by hearing it from me, but perhaps I would encourage you, read the Gita. It's actually kind of cool. It's one of the world's kind of foundational texts. It's a great translation by Eknath Eswaran, that you can read, that you can listen to. I recommend it. It's kind of like a cool little audiobook. With that, we will open it up for questions.
What about Mark and Facebook were the most important reasons? You talk about you didn't know about stock options. You weren't forecasting out all the comp. Why did you join? What was the aura that you saw? I'm trying to hire. So if you want to build the future of uploaded consciousness, hit me up. That's my shameless plug. Why did you join?
Okay, I can take that question because he joined because I told him to join.
Nice. Okay.
It doesn't matter what he tells you. He literally joined because I told him to join. He was going to join some email filtering company that used ML to filter your inbox back in 2005, which didn't make any sense. I think that I was really fortunate that Facebook launched right before I graduated from college. So I was one of the very, very early users. And back then, it was a product that I was using even more than emails. So I was using it all the time, constantly. I was being entertained by it. I was using it more than AIM or more than Zephyr, like, the messaging protocols back then. So when I came to California, I too was working at Oracle with him. And we heard that Facebook, had moved out, like Mark and his co-founders had moved out to Palo Alto. We somehow found a way to get introduced and went in for interviews. In fact, I have this funny interview story. I showed up for my interview at noon and no one showed up till 3 p.m. I sat in the office all by myself, waiting for someone to show up. And then the adult in the room back then, Jeff Rothschild, I think he was 50 something, did a tech interview with me. And then finally Mark shows up and she was like, you need to keep her entertained. I'm going to call all the engineers, call Dustin, find out where they all are. Mark was asking me stupid questions like, if you filled a bottle, if you were carrying water up and hiking the Himalayas, would you fill the bottle halfway or full way? I mean, it was like a whole bunch of dumb questions, for 45 minutes. Despite all of that, I still was so excited to join. And I think the big thing there was definitely the product. But the second thing was the vibe. The I guess the environment and the atmosphere was just, the energy was just so electric. That the first time I visited Facebook, it wasn't for an interview, but there were Stanford students hanging out everywhere. Nobody was actually working at Facebook. There were people on the floor, 2 to 3 people at a desk. Everyone was having fun. Everyone was coding. I was like, it doesn't really matter where this company is going to go. This is where I want to be for the next year. So that energy, that momentum, I guess the authenticity of the environment, was a big reason. And the fact that I was using the product all the time.
Did you care about Mark's vibe, or was it just the overall ethos and vibe of the space?
So back then, there were 2 or 3 core people, and they were all engineers. So while Mark was asking all these questions, Mark wasn't Mark, the figure he is today. He was just another one of those guys. But the engineers that were there were just absolutely amazing. One of them that interviewed me was Adam D'Angelo. Another one was Scott Marlett. He built the whole photos product on Facebook all by himself. Dustin, who was the co-founder, CTO back then. They were just all amazing.
Kind of had interviewed at Facebook, and then I was kind of, get my notice, and I was going to start at Facebook 3 or 4 days later. And I remember showing up to the office at kind of a reasonable hour, 9 a.m. And there was no sign of anyone. The office was locked, and I'm just I have made a terrible mistake. It's there is no company here. And then true to form, at about 10:30, 11, somebody...
At least they showed up.
And I think I remember asking Dustin, I'm just yo, he's dude, I was up since 5 a.m., kind of doing hot pushes after hot pushes because I pushed out a bug or something. Amazing.
Yeah, the story when I went to interview was exactly the same. We'd been up all night, the site was down. We needed to fix it. And we couldn't wake up in time to interview you. So it was pretty much the same. But even today, when people ask me, what should I look for a job? I think back, to that interview day, and I'm there are only 3 things you need to look for. And those are the 3 Ps. It's people, the product, and what kind of personal impact are you going to have? And for me, Facebook checked all 3 boxes.
You spoke about kind of your philosophy on money and then a lot of success in your career, but then you also spoke about being stressed as CTO. So throughout this journey, maybe in the middle or later part of your career, did you have to think about whether you wanted to continue on such high kind of pressure roles, or if you wanted to explore different types of roles outside of leadership or founding something?
I plan to have some variation. I want to work forever, until I'm alive. I love this game. I love doing what I do. And one of the things that I often think about is that if you are, I do not think it is possible to do interesting, important things without also feeling a level of responsibility and stress, right? I think if you are literally playing at the edge of your own capabilities, you should feel a little bit of in some ways, not fear of failure, but you're kind of uncomfortable. You don't know if you're going to be able to do it. You haven't done this shit before. This is uncomfortable. You're trying to do something that you don't know how to do. Perhaps your team doesn't know yet, right? So I feel as though that I still go through a bunch of those emotions, right? Where I'm like, this is hard. Oh man, why did I sign up for this? And I'm like, no, this is this is supposed to be hard. And that's kind of an emotional thing that I think it's fine to go through, right? Because if I'm not feeling that, that means it's too easy. That means I kind of like am not in some ways perhaps playing like the most important or hardest game that I could. So it's still uncomfortable, right? Like at SPC, one of the things we talk about a lot is that we're not just trying to build like a standard vanilla venture capital firm. Like we're trying to provide a kind of like an environment that allows, we're trying to do something a little different, like in terms of like providing an environment for founders to explore, to ideate. We're trying to build kind of like investment, I would say, opportunities or products that meet the founders where they are. And we are evolving what we are building as well, right? And that can be uncomfortable because we are trying to kind of in some ways shake up an industry that hasn't seen a ton of change, like venture capital. We don't always know the answers, but I don't know. I enjoy the pressure, even though it can be quite hard. It's like, what's this dude's name? Patrick Mahomes. He still pukes before games and stuff because the pressure gets to you. But like he still plays the game because he loves it. Like this is what he lives for, Yeah.
And you always get to choose the game you're playing.
Yeah.
You just need to make sure you're playing the right one.
In terms of creating constructive conflict, how do you toe the line between making it so that you create that conflict and also not having people not want to work with you anymore, or maybe feeling so uncomfortable that they leave?
I think you just need to not care about those things.
I mean, honestly, I don't recommend this for anyone. Like I had an uphill battle every single time that I did it. Until I started my own company or like started SPC, where I surrounded myself with people who were a good counterfoil to what I was doing. So I do not recommend it unless you have the privilege of being able to do that.
Or just, I think that the scaled out version of this is that I think this has to just kind of be something that is a core company cultural value that the company agrees to do. I think it's quite hard to strike out on your own and do this. But, I do think that those two things that you said, which is, does it make it sometimes harder to collaborate with people because they might end up feeling pissed at you? Or does it lead to potentially people not wanting to? But yeah, I think those are like major downstream consequences. Easier to pull off when you kind of have this as a virtue within the company, as opposed to something that you feel like you're doing on an island by yourself.
So I was curious that both of you were trained as engineers. Was there anything you had to unlearn as you moved towards managing, growing, investing in companies?
I think about it a little differently. It's less about learning, but more about how can you compound on your learnings. So it's like taking a learning and like evolving it and compounding on it through the different experiences you've had. The only thing that is really important, and I constantly remind myself of this throughout the years, is never to shoot down an idea or another person. And I used to do that very early in my career. I've tried that like a million times. It's going to fail because of XYZ reason. But you have to realize that the times have changed. The environment has changed. There may be a technology shift. Like maybe this person has like some nuanced approach to the same idea. So you have to be really patient about like revisiting concepts, revisiting ideas, revisiting solutions, implementations. Across like different things. It's not just product, around org building, around organizational design, around like, building a set of values for your company. So I keep myself really open. I might have tried that. It might have failed, but I'm going to let this person try it again because the circumstances and the variables are different. So I often think about it in terms of compounding on my learnings, not necessarily unlearning things.
I learned that, unlike computers, people are non-deterministic, but turns out computers are also not deterministic anymore. So they're all kind of stochastic now. So anyways, that was going to be my answer.
You talked about the main traits that you're looking for in founders. And I want to come at that topic from a slightly different angle, because you have this list of traits or market signals, things that you're looking for. And you had that list when you first started, and now you've looked at a hell of a lot of companies. So I'm really interested in how has that list evolved? When you look at that list of traits, Which one has the largest delta from where you started to where you are today?
We always talked about resilience kind of being important. But I think now that we have been doing this for a while, I think that the delta in its importance is even more about, like, it's actually probably the one that has had, it is so hard to be a founder, right? Like, you get, on a good day, like, if you will kind of like wake up feeling great. By lunchtime, you're like, this shit is not going to work. By evening, you'll be like, yes, I closed a hire. Or yeah. And that roller coaster is so intense. And this is the thing. This is like, it doesn't get any less intense as you get more. Because the question is always, oh, when I get to that next level of scale, like, it'll be better if I hire. But to your point, if you're doing things right, you will just shift the goalposts. You'll be playing a more intense game. You'll be, and the swings can often actually be even larger as you kind of get to the bigger scale, because suddenly you're like, oh, this stuff is more important, right? So I think that the only way you can deal with it is if you are just kind of resilient, right? And that doesn't mean, it's quite different. Resiliency is different than, what's the term I'm looking for? That you kind of almost wall yourself away. You have to allow yourself to feel the emotions, because that's how you kind of like really care, like both the ups and the downs, but not get super affected by either side, right? I think that's the underrated one.
I would say my biggest delta is actually emphasis on market. And I never thought I'd say this until 2022. And the first language model and ChatGPT was launched. Like, as an investor, you fall into these patterns and you're like, oh, what does the market look like for this? Like, is this a large enough market for venture-backed returns? And I'm like, you don't know what the market is going to look like. I mean, this is the first time in a very, very long time.
So you're saying that market is a lot less important than you thought?
It's a lot less important.
Ooh,
and I just feel like for the first time in maybe decades, we have no idea what the market is going to look like. We have no idea how consumer behavior is going to be changed. Like, if someone came to me like before 2022 and said, oh, I'm going to build a new consumer app that has like new consumer behaviors, I'm like, you're going to fail. Like, there is no market for new behaviors in our world today. But, or like, if someone came to me and said like, oh, I'm going to like build this verticalized SaaS application like end to end, I'm like, this market is like pretty tiny. I just don't think you can know what this market looks like. I mean, like, look at things like character AI. Like, it's just impossible. So my emphasis on, and this is something I've had to unlearn, my emphasis on market, and I've had to tell my team members that too many times, like, there's no point in looking at the market right now. Like, how is he thinking about the future? Like, where does he see the world go 5 years from now? Like, can you build conviction? Like, I remember we had a team that applied to founder fellowship, and he was like convinced that all resources were going to be directed to inference. And this was like when everybody was like still like working on like pre-training like stuff. And like, I would say almost everybody on our team passed on him. It was like, we have no idea what he's talking about. And I was like, you've just got to believe in what he's saying and imagine that this kind of world would exist. Ends up being one of our most successful companies today. So I'm just like, I've got to unlearn or like almost de-emphasize market because I have no idea.
This is actually in some ways to kind of tie it back. I think this is very self-consistent with my point of view on the world is pretty fucking complex, right? And I think actually like when we simplify markets, I think you almost like the simple models of it don't actually capture the nuances of how it can evolve and grow. So I'm just like, man, markets are too complex to think about. And you can do a shitty reductive analysis, or you can just focus on building the product, right? And like build a great product. Yeah.
I don't completely believe in that.
This is what happens, Ruchi. We were going to end it on a good note.
No. You're saying something completely different from what I'm saying.
Okay.
I'm saying, like, if you are building, like, if you're solving a known problem in a known market, you can definitely do a reductive analysis of what that market looks like.
But who wants to do that?
Exactly. So, like, you're actually looking for people who are building for the future where we don't understand what those markets will look like, which is very, very different than what the last, 2 decades in tech have looked like.
With that, thank you all for coming. We have to hop, but this was fun. I appreciate you all coming out here. That was another episode of -1 from the team at South Park Commons. Make sure to subscribe to our show wherever you listen to podcasts and find us on social at South Park Commons. And thanks to our friends at Atomic Growth for their support in bringing this episode to life.